Alright, episode 4 of the Bible, and this episode is called Kingdom. King Saul and the Israelite army faced seemingly impossible odds against the Philistine army and their champion Goliath. An unlikely hero, the young David, defeats Goliath and goes on to lead the Israelites to victory against the Philistines. Saul fears that David means to steal his throne and so betrays his loyal warrior. This is Saul's undoing, and David becomes king and later captures Jerusalem for the Israelites. And this review, I have my dad with me, he knows the actual story of this in the Bible way better than I do, so he'll pitch in whenever he deems necessary. So, what are your thoughts on the series so far up to this point?
Well, it's very good. It's just so helpful to see the stories in the Bible come to life in visual images and in a movie. That's how we're oriented in these days. And we all watch TV, we watch movies, and we also read books. But the stories of the Bible can be complex and they can be difficult to understand sometimes. And so I think this series can be helpful for somebody who has sort of a beginning knowledge of the Bible. And what I'd like to hope is that watching these movies actually stirs in people an interest to explore the Word further and actually read the Bible and see the rest of the story, because there's just no way for the Bible series to adequately convey the message of the Bible in just 10 hours. It takes even somebody very committed a year to read the Bible, and sometimes longer, and that's just going really fast. So this brings it to life, and I would just encourage anybody to, if they have enjoyed these, to break down the Word themselves and compare it and see the rest of the story of the ones that they've actually shown, as well as the ones that they were not able to show in the series.
I agree. And the first part of this actual series got 13.1 million views on the night it aired. That was the most watched cable event of the entire year. God beat zombies, believe it or not. He actually did.
That's good.
And The Walking Dead has been the number one show since forever. So, God beat zombies. So, the title Kingdom refers to, of course, King Saul and David's kingdom in Israel, the kingdom they forged. So, it starts off with King Saul because the last episode left us with Saul being anointed king by Samuel, being the chosen king to rule Israel by God. So, it starts off with Saul going to this camp of Philistines. God has commanded him to wipe out anything and everything there, leave nothing alive. So, he doesn't do this. He takes a couple of prisoners and some goats, and Samuel's there, and he's like, God commanded you to kill everything. Saul just blows him off. He doesn't really listen to him because he's king. He doesn't need Samuel's words of wisdom from God. He doesn't need it because he's king. So Samuel has been told by God, this guy's not the right guy. We need somebody else. So in the Bible, the way this happened, in the actual Bible, the way this happens is he goes to Jesse, David's father, and goes through all of his children until he gets to David. But in the way it was shown in this series, not that this is too big of a change, but he finds him at the stream with all his sheep, and he anoints him as the next king of Israel right then and there. So David kind of becomes a trusted advisor of Saul, and one day the Philistines come up with their 9-foot-tall champion Goliath. And we all know who Goliath is, and we know the story of how David took his slingshot and struck down Goliath and then chopped off his head with his own sword. And yes, they do actually show that in this episode. So it shows David growing up and killing hundreds of thousands of Philistines and becoming a true leader of Israel, basically almost the right-hand man of Saul at this point. So Saul's starting to wonder, this guy, he's going to take my crown. He's going to try and take over me as king. Saul doesn't like this. So he tries to kill David. So David goes on the run because he doesn't want to get killed. So he's on the run from Saul, and they're at this for a long time. And one day Saul goes into a cave to relieve himself. In other words, use the bathroom. And David comes up and chops off a bit of his robe that he's wearing. So he says, "Hey, I'm here." And so Saul turns around. He sees David, and David says to him, "I could have killed you right then and now. I could have killed you." And Saul's like, "Why didn't you?" He's like, "Because you're one of the anointed."
And it didn't actually happen in that exact sequence in the Bible, but it get to the same point. He didn't do it. He didn't just confront him right there in the cave. In reality, but that's how they chose to portray it. With a little bit of creative, artistic license.
Yeah. So David then becomes king after Saul and Jonathan die. Saul commits suicide, and David becomes king. So David takes Jerusalem for the Israelites, and this is now their city. Then, after I'm trying to recall everything that happened.
One little side note while you're thinking about that, to me it's kind of funny. The actor who portrays Samuel in this movie, Samuel, who is taking care of God's, he's the prophet of God, is the same actor who portrays this crooked archaeologist in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, who was looking to basically desecrate the Ark. And you have Samuel, who is
total 180 of that personality.
Right. So maybe I don't know how that came about, but I think that's kind of funny.
But
30 years apart.
David sees Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, commits adultery, kills Uriah to cover it up. Mm-hmm. So they have a son, and God says, "No, no, 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 no," and the son dies. So they have another son. This son is Solomon. So this episode ends with the foreshadowing of the temple being built, and David saying to Bathsheba, "Solomon's going to build this temple. He's going to build God's temple," so that's the end of episode 4, Kingdom. In the next part, we're going to cover Daniel in the lion's den. Let's see, Nebuchadnezzar, all that stuff, and then we get into the New Testament. We get into Jesus and his arrival. All right, that was part 2 of my review of the Bible.